There was a time when Hollywood didn't have influencers or streaming premieres. It had queens. Women who could stop traffic just by stepping out of a car, who could make a studio rich or ruin it with a single bad picture, who built an entire industry's glamour on their shoulders long before anyone said the word icon. This is the story of 10 women who didn't just appear in old Hollywood. They ruled it. Let's start with the woman who arguably invented the idea of the fierce, uncompromising leading lady, Bette Davis. She wasn't conventionally beautiful by studio standards, and executives told her so more than once. Davis didn't care. She fought Warner Brothers in court over bad scripts, she took roles nobody else wanted, and she turned characters other actresses would have softened into some of the most electric performances ever put on film. By the time she won her second Oscar, the industry understood something it hadn't wanted to admit: talent could outmuscle beauty every time. Then there was Katharine Hepburn, who walked into Hollywood wearing trousers when women simply didn't, and dared anyone to say something about it. Early in her career, exhibitors actually labeled her box office poison. She didn't flinch. She went back to Broadway, bought the film rights to her own comeback vehicle, and returned to Hollywood on her own terms, eventually becoming the most awarded actress in Oscar history. Hepburn didn't ask for a seat at the table. She built her own. If Hepburn ruled through defiance, Joan Crawford ruled through sheer will. She started as a chorus girl and clawed her way into becoming one of MGM's biggest stars through relentless reinvention, era after era, decade after decade. When the studio tried to discard her as she aged out of ingenue roles, she didn't retire quietly. She took a part nobody wanted in Mildred Pierce and won an Oscar for it, proving she could outlast the very system that tried to write her off. No list of old Hollywood queens is complete without Elizabeth Taylor, a woman who was famous before she could legally drive. She grew up on camera, from a child actress in National Velvet to one of the most photographed women alive. Taylor didn't just star in the biggest films of her era, she became bigger than the films themselves. Her personal life generated as many headlines as her performances, but underneath the tabloid noise was a genuinely gifted actress who won multiple Oscars and helped define what it meant to be a movie star in the truest sense of the word. Of course, there's Marilyn Monroe, the most photographed, most quoted, most mythologized woman of the entire era. Studios built her up as the ultimate blonde bombshell, but Monroe wanted more than the image the cameras sold. She studied acting seriously, she pushed for better material, and she started her own production company at a time when almost no actress dared to. She never fully escaped the myth built around her, but her instincts about her own image, and her hunger to be taken seriously as an artist, were sharper than most people gave her credit for. Vivien Leigh became a global name almost overnight when she landed the role of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, beating out hundreds of actresses for a part that Hollywood had spent years searching for. She brought a ferocity to the screen that matched anything her male co-stars could offer, and she followed it years later with an equally devastating performance in A Streetcar Named Desire. 2 roles, 2 Oscars, and a permanent place in cinema history. Rita Hayworth spent years being sold to audiences as a fantasy, the ultimate pin-up of the war years. The woman soldiers carried photographs of overseas. But underneath the glamour was a genuinely skilled dancer and actress who had reinvented herself from the ground up, changing her name, her hairline, even her voice coaching, to become the star the studio wanted. She once said the tragedy of her life was that men fell in love with a fantasy and woke up disappointed by the real woman. It's one of the more haunting lines to come out of the entire era, and it says everything about what stardom cost these women behind the cameras. Ingrid Bergman brought something different to Hollywood entirely, a natural, almost effortless authenticity at a time when performances tended to be bigger and more theatrical. She became one of the biggest stars of the 1940s with films like Casablanca, only to be cast out by the very industry that made her famous when her personal life became a scandal. Hollywood turned on her completely for years. And yet she returned, rebuilt her career, and won another Oscar, proving that the industry that wrote her off still couldn't do without her talent. Lauren Bacall entered Hollywood at just 19 years old with a stare so confident it unsettled seasoned directors, and a voice trained to be lower and slower until it became one of the most distinctive sounds in film history. She held her own against Humphrey Bogart from her very first scene with him, in an era when young actresses were expected to fade into the background next to leading men. Bacall never faded into anything. And finally, Audrey Hepburn, who arrived just as the era was starting to shift, bringing an entirely new kind of leading lady into focus. Delicate but never fragile, elegant but never distant, she became the template for a certain kind of grace that Hollywood had never quite captured before. She won an Oscar for her very first major American film role, and by the time she made Breakfast at Tiffany's, she had become something rarer than a movie star, a permanent symbol of style itself. 10 women, 10 completely different paths, and yet the same fight underneath all of it. Every one of them walked into an industry built to use them up and discard them, and every one of them found a way to bend that industry instead. They weren't just famous. They were formidable. And decades later, long after the studios that built them are gone, their names are still the ones we remember when we talk about what it truly meant to rule Hollywood.